り。
はい。皆さん、こんばんは。JVTA プラスのお時間です。今日担当するのは、浅川奈美と初登場のアリスさんです。
Nice to meet you, everyone.
嬉しいね、アリス。初めて登場してくれた。なので、今日初めましての皆さん多いから、ちょっとアリス、皆さんに自己紹介お願いします。
Yes, gladly. Because it's my first time here on JVTA Live, JVTA Plus Live. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alice, and I am one of the instructors as well as one of the translators here at JVTA Tokyo. I work in the Japanese to English media translation program. One of the things that you should probably know about me is that I really love watching anime. And so I'm really excited to take part in today's JVTA Plus, where we get to talk about one of my favorites.
そうだよね。こういう感じなので、今日はインター FM みたいに、私は日本語で、アリスもね、日本語ペラペラなんだけど、今日は英語でお送りしていきたいと思います。で、今日は初のね、勝手に字幕日英バージョンをやっていきたいと思います。イエーイ。
イエーイ。Happy to be part of it.
そうだよね。
Yeah, so this is our first time doing it from Japanese to English for the勝手にSubtitle program. And so because it's the first time, I kind of wanted to choose something a bit special and something that's maybe a little bit challenging. And so me and Asakawa-san were thinking for a little while and really kind of wondering what was going to be the most appropriate thing to introduce. Like, should it be something famous? Should it be something classic, like a Ghibli film? Or should it be something like really modern and popular, like Jujutsu Kaisen or Kimetsu? But in the, yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just thinking, so since it's the first time to do this, though, I felt a lot of pressure to sort of show off something that would kind of like show us really working our translation muscles and would be kind of like the Olympics for media localizers.
そうだよね。結構作品選びもね、迷ったよね。なんか、本当に気軽にやりたかったんだけど、でも2人ともアニメが大好きだし、アリスにはアニメのことを話してもらいたいなと思ったから、今日ね、とっておきのアニメをね、持ってきたよね。
Yes!
Yes! じゃあちょっと早速アニメ紹介しちゃう？
Okay. Allow me to introduce. Yes, as maybe some of you could tell from the background that I have for my Zoom, I decided to introduce a show from a few years back, actually, Mr. Osomatsu, or Osomatsu-san. And it's a really funny kind of animated sitcom gag nonsense series. It's really got a special place in my heart because the year that I first moved to Japan, this was everywhere. It's like, it was like as big as Kimetsu is now. So I always kind of associate it with my first year in Japan, but it's also really, really funny. But yeah, although this first came out about 5 years ago, at the time, it was announced that they were going to do an English dubbed version. However, it proved to be really challenging because so much of the humor about this show is very culturally specific to Japan and requires you to like know a lot about these characters already. And it proved to be such a challenge that the English version was delayed multiple times.
ああ、そうだったんだ。なんかね、これだけビッグタイトルだからすぐに吹き替えになってると思ってたらなってなかったんだね。
Yeah, and I think the reason, the reason that it was so challenging, or rather like because it was so challenging, whenever I went back to this show, I was always kind of thinking like, okay, how would you approach this in English? Like, what are some of the strategies that you could use? There was an English subtitled version, however, that came out on an anime only streaming service called Crunchyroll. So for our subtitles today, I'm going to compare some of the official version that came out through Crunchyroll with some of the imaginary 勝手にSubtitle version that I made up in my head when I was watching it recently.
じゃあ今日はそのアリスの頭の中のね、ある大切なアリスの勝手に字幕が見れるってことで、じゃあちょっとこの作品もういっちゃう？
Yes, let's get going. Okay. Well, first, before we get into the specific scenes that I'll show today, I should probably I thought let's introduce a little bit about this show first. And probably the most important thing to introduce is that it's actually like a reboot or a remake of a much earlier show or a much earlier gag manga / anime series that originally came out in the 1960s called not Osomatsu-san, but Osomatsu-kun. So,
だってみんなまだ子供だからね。ここね。
And so, as you can see, it's about the lives of these 6 Matsuno brothers who are identical sextuplets. And they all have pretty much like the same naughty little boy personality. And so they meet all these crazy characters around their town and go on all kinds of adventures. It's a lot of fun. But in the new version, they're all grown-ups and it's become this kind of scenario.
すごい親切なチャートがあるよ。Yes. でここに見えてる松の家六つ子は、まあ同じ顔の雰囲気を漂わせて大人になったけど、まあ癖がねより強くなったよね。子供の頃に比べ物にならないぐらい大人になったらそれぞれが癖が強いキャラクターになりましたね。
Right. They went from this kind of like identical little lump of kids to this very unique family where they all have like a very strong character. And it makes it like one of the, sort of like classic sitcom family structures that I just find really, really charming. But what's interesting about this show and what's kind of like unique about it amongst other comedy anime is that they're all terrible people.
そうなの。
They all suck.
でもお父さんとお母さんは素晴らしい人たち。
They are good. I mean, all of the sextuplets are kind of terrible people. And that's what I like about this show is it's not afraid to be really mean to them. Because they're really funny and charming and all that, but they're all neats. None of them have ever like worked a day in their lives or have any relationships. All they do is mooch off their parents, annoy the other people in their town, and crush on this. They all crush on the same girl, Totoko, and they steal food from the nice local oden seller, Chibita, who's their childhood friend. So that's the basics of the show. And from that spins out all kinds of crazy gags on the same basic structure of characters.
そう、お母さんがね、ニートたちって呼ぶんだよね、この六つ子をね。だからもうニートをすごいポジティブに捉えてる、すごい稀なアニメだと思います。
Yeah.
まあちょっとじゃあね、コンテクストをアリスに共有してもらったので、早速じゃあ勝手に字幕のシーン行ってみましょうか。
Right. Okay. So let's look at the first scene that I was thinking would be a real challenge to translate.
このシーン、このエピソード最高面白いよね。
Yeah. This is from really early in the series, and I thought this would be a good one to introduce because it brings up like some of the things that I think are most important for media translators to think about. It's like the individual the language choices that characters are making and what that tells us about those characters. And this scene is really great for showing off some of the unique ways that each of these characters are speaking. And from that like unique character, it becomes like this really like surreal situation. It's really fun. But to give a bit of context, so at the beginning of this scene, Chibita, who's the local oden. Okay, so oden, if anyone doesn't know what oden food is, like he's a street food vendor, okay? And the Matsuno brothers are always coming to his store and dine and dashing. So to get his revenge, he kidnaps Karamatsu, who's one of the brothers in the family, and he's holding him for ransom until they pay their bar tab. And so he's tied to a pole in the ocean. When the tide comes in, he's going to drown. And so now that his evil plan is into fruition, JVTA calls the Matsuno family. And unfortunately, the one to pick up is Jushimatsu, who's this amazing, crazy, genius, idiot angel. I love him, but he has no common sense. And he seems to be mishearing everything that JVTA is saying. And on the receiving end of all this is our resident sort of straight man for the comedy setup here, Choromatsu, who's got to try and make sense of whatever JVTA is saying through Jushimatsu. So this next scene, we're seeing a kind of telephone game happening between these three characters.
はい。じゃあ行ってみよう。
And so this is how the official subtitles handled this. Now, as I mentioned, right. And one of the things that you'll notice straight away is that this is a great way to learn Japanese.
確かに。
This is really good for helping people to understand like what the humor in the original Japanese lines are, and you can really hear like the point of what's going on, because the telephone game in this first part is that Jushimatsu, who is color-coded in yellow here, is misheard yukai as yokai, so you know, like a monster, and he's relaying that. And so that's our first little bit of misunderstanding. And then we get that here in the kakko, or in the brackets here, to show what the actual meaning is. And so in the second part, he's mishearing again when JVTA is talking about the high tide or mancho, and he's misheard that as kancho, which is yes.
まあね、
so
ちょっ
sort
と
of
クランチロールバージョンはもう本当に苦労した、頑張ったかもしれないけど、残念ながら面白くなってないよね。
Oh, I don't know about that, Asakawa-san. I think this shows you why it's funny in Japanese and it explains the joke, but I don't think it's quite as funny in English. And so when I was thinking about like how a translator could make this section of dialogue a bit as funny in English as it is in the original Japanese, this is what I came up with.
もう
Ta-da!
だら
That's
ーん
mine.
ちょっと説明してってアリス。
Okay, so when I was approaching this, I tried to think about like what's unique about these three characters, because that's where I think the humor in this scene is really coming from. And the first is that like Jushimatsu is kind of taking things wrong and coming up with all of these kind of like surreal images. Choromatsu is being very straight-laced about this and sort of trying to make sense of it. And JVTA, I love the way he talks.
そうそう、バロー、なんとかなんだよ、バローってすごい言うんだよね。
Right. It's their unique personality really comes out through the way they speak. And so I wanted my translation to draw attention to what's unique about these characters. And so what I did in this first section is I tried to keep it so we're maintaining this motif of mishearing. So we're mishearing yukai as yokai here. And so I wanted to think, okay, what's a similar gag that we could do in English? And so I had Jushimatsu answering the phone initially have this as apparently Karamatsu's become very handsome. And then JVTA answering, no, he's for ransom.
Ransom.
Yeah. So that way we can get that.
悪くない。
Yeah. So we can get that same kind of like a motif of mishearing something. But then I thought like that actually makes a bit too much sense for Jushimatsu to say it.
確かに重心松はそのセンスはないかもしれないよね。
Yeah, I feel like Jushimatsu is always kind of like operating on a different level to other human beings, which is why he can come up with something like yokai ni natta. And so I wanted something that had like a similar surreal image, but kept that motif of like mishearing something to do with the kidnapping. And so I thought, okay, what rhymes with what? And I wrote down like a list of things that rhyme. And eventually I landed on Karamatsu's become an ostrich. That's hostage, idiot.
ダチョウ。いや、これいいよ。いいよ、アリス。なんかね、コメントでも、ジニアスって来てるよ。ありがとう。ありがとう。そう思うよね。ちょっと面白いよね。オストリッチ、オステージ。うん、いいんじゃん
Don't make me blush.
ちょっと、それでちょっと続いても行ってみようよ。まだまだ。
Right. And in the second one, my initial plan was I would think of like another set of words that has a bit of a rhyming scheme going on. But then I started thinking a bit more about these characters and like what's interesting about the way they talk. And sort of coming back to JVTA here, as Asakawa-san was saying, he kind of like talks like an old-fashioned gangster.
ギャングスターっていうかなんかね、江戸っ子おじさんっていう感じ。
Right. Yeah, like an angry little old man.
そう、
And
い
it's
つも
funny
怒っ
because
てる感じ。
yeah. And he's kind of always like putting on a bit of a tough edge. He's a really nice character. He's very kind. But so you get that kind of gap between like the way he speaks and the kind of person he is. And then I thought about like what's unique about Jushimatsu, and that's the fact that he's like such a space cadet, you know. And so I thought about, in addition to mishearing things, what are likely to be like some of the points where an amusing miscommunication would happen between these two types of characters. And so what I remembered was, again, like a bit more about like what's happening in this scene is that Chibita is going to leave Karamatsu to die in the ocean. And then I remembered, you know, there's that scene in The Godfather. これは面白いよ。
Yeah,
there's a very famous expression for like old mafia movies and stuff that if you get to kill someone and throw their body in the ocean, you say they're going to sleep with the fishes. And so what I imagined is that if we were going to have this like completely like redone in English, and a fun way to play around with that would be to have, instead of Jushimatsu mishearing it, he could instead take that literally and explain it that way. And so that gives us this strange image. It's like he's fallen asleep at the aquarium and he's going to die. And Chonomatsu is indeed like still quite confused by this.
いや、すごい。アリスは私十四松ファンだから、すごい十四松のキャラクターをね、出してくれてるこの字幕は嬉しいなと思う。
Oh, thank you.
十四松は本当に奇跡のキャラクターだと思ってるんだよね、私。一番好き。
Wow, what do you like about Jushimatsu?
十四松をこう今コンプライアンス的に十四松っていうキャラクターを何かの作品の中に入れていくっていうのは難しいと思う。このおそ松さんっていう六つ子の中の一人であったり、ニートであったり、こうおそ松さん、おそ松くんからの歴史があるから今日本社会に十四松は受け入れてもらえてるんだと思うけど、十四松単体では作れないと思うんだよね。それぐらい奇跡。目だけで奇跡。目だけでもう十四松のそのファンタジーがそこにあるからね。ちょっとダメ。これ以上喋ると十四松の話になっちゃうから。アリスの好きなキャラクターを教えて。
Actually, my favorite character might surprise you. But it would actually have to be this guy, Iyami.
Iyami?
Yes.
なんで
I like him.
私小さい頃とかイヤミとか本当に嫌いなキャラクターだったんだよね。
No. Okay. Well, I'm gonna be the Iyami defense squad here. I really like this character.
たまに優しいし、唯一常識人、唯一普通の人。普通か分かんないけど。
Define normal, I guess.
なんか価値観が普通の人。
Right. But the thing is, like, what I like about Iyami, there's many things to like about Iyami.
じゃあ次のエピソードは、イヤミの逆襲だ。
Yeah, well, what I wanted to introduce about Iami in particular here is that he's kind of like the original star of the show. And I find that there's like a really unique pathos in the new version, Osomatsu-san, because Iami is kind of like constantly breaking the fourth wall. He knows that he used to be the main character and that he's not popular anymore. And I don't know, I find this kind of like almost old Hollywood glamour to him. Like he reminds me of like some sort of Joan Crawford type or something. It's very campy and very fun. And I think maybe it's because like I didn't grow up watching like the original Osomatsu-kun or, you know, Bakabon where he appeared. I kind of like have the same feeling as someone in 1960s Japan where I'm meeting this kind of like crazy, unique character for the first time. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool.
そうなんだ。全然ハンサムじゃないし。
Oh, but he's voiced by Suzuken, so that kind of makes up for it a little bit.
そっか、そっか。アリスのじゃあ、嫌味さん、嫌味愛が、ね、このエピソードを選んだ感じもあるけど、じゃあ早速また次の字幕見てみる？
Right. So in this scene, I've chosen a scene from an episode that, you know, I'm hoping that will like awaken the like the sleeper cell Iami fans out there in the world, because I'm sure you exist. But what I love about this is that here we're seeing Iami address the audience directly and talk about his dissatisfaction with losing his stardom, because in the original he used to be like the you know, the biggest star and like his
main だったもんね。
Yeah, he was the main character, and like his the she thing, like this little pose that he's doing, it was so famous at the time that like you can see pictures of Godzilla doing it, of the Beatles doing it. But look how far his stock has fallen. And so I wanted to express like some of the unique things about Iami in the way that I translated for him. So let's see a little bit of his complaints about the show. This is the original version that we can see was translated for Crunchyroll. And we can see that some of the unique aspects of the way that Iami talks are coming out here. So notice the way that he's ending his sentences in Japanese. Can you tell us a bit about that, Asukawa-san?
はい。イヤミザンス。ね、イヤミがもう今日は自分が主役をもう奪い取るぞっていうところで、かつてのおそ松くんといえば、ミーが主役。ミーね。自分のことをミーって呼ぶのよ。で、まあ、常にザンスっていう、こう、イヤミオリジナルグラマーで喋るんだよね、この人。ね。で、あとは、まあ、シェーっていうのがね、もうシェーが、日本語の中でもシェーっていうオノマトペはそんなにイヤミ以前、イヤミ語、プリイヤミ、ポストイヤミなかったんだよ。イヤミでは、シェーは、ザンスも、私はイヤミ以外、ザンスをつけて喋る日本人を知らないんですよ。だからこれは独特のやっぱりイヤミワールドにしないといけないシーンだなっていうふうに思ってます。ちょっとじゃあ、クランチロールのタイトルも見てみますかね。
Right. So here in the Crunchyroll version, we can see that we're maintaining some of the aspects of like Yami's very original style of speech here. So you'll notice here that he's talking about me in Japanese. There are things me doesn't like. It's been transferred almost directly so that you don't get any sense of disconnect between the words you hear pronounced and the words that you see on screen, which if you're learning Japanese is a good way to help you study. And here, like me was the main character. Children, adults were mimicking me's gag. And here we see him breaking the fourth wall again, talking about the title of the show, Osomatsu-san. Me's roles have been cut way down. And we see him register his complaints and then address the audience that he's going to take it back. And I think that this is on the right track. But there are elements that I feel like Iami's most appealing characteristics are not quite getting across.
そう、アリスの愛してるイヤミにはなってないと思うんですね。
We're getting there. But I feel like the things that I like best about Iami could probably be expressed like a little bit more, they could be evoked more strongly by just altering some of the words that he uses in this scene. And so what I started to think about, like, okay, what are some of the unique things about Yami that I like? And okay, we've got one, that kind of like old-fashioned entertainer, like that kind of like old Hollywood or like vaudeville feel to the way that he talks about his act. The second point is that he's kind of a terrible person as well. Like he's like a petty thief and a crook who's always like, you know, ripping people off and doing scams. And the other point is like he thinks very highly of himself. He thinks that he's the smartest person in the whole town, and like his unique way of speaking kind of like reflects that unique status that he has for himself. And the other thing is that he is obsessed with France. And I've met people like this in real life, so I can really relate to this.
行ったことはないよ、今ね。
He's never been to France.
そう、行ったことないんだけど、ミーはフランスザマスみたいなことを言うんだよね。
Right. He's always claiming to have just come back from France, which reminds me so much of people who want to tell me about their years backpacking in Europe. It's very very aru, very relatable. And so I was thinking about like, okay, what can I take from these sort of equivalent character types in English to kind of blend that like unique Yami melange of vocabulary? Okay, and so here's what I got.
アリス、これ最高じゃない。
I don't know about that.
特に3番よ、3番よ。もう。
Let me break down a bit of what I'm doing here. So notice in the original, he's saying me, me as an English word. But if we're doing this in English, then we want to have like an equivalently foreign word. And so fortunately, since like basic French is easily understood by many English speakers, we can just go like moi. You know, like Miss Piggy. Moi. I think maybe Yami would say moi though. And so with just like this one tweak, we can get that Francophile thing across. And then again, because I want to suggest that kind of character who thinks of themselves as like an entertainer and is like putting on airs of being very knowledgeable about the entertainment industry, rather than using a word that's associated with strictly manga, like gag here, he strikes me as the type who'd more likely put it in terms of like physical comedy or like a more kind of like professional word here. And in general, like I wanted to make his register sound a little bit elevated. So instead of like, there are things he doesn't like, or there are things I don't like, I wish to register a complaint as like my more formal way of suggesting that same ideas.
スノブなね。スノブな嫌な感じを出してますね。すごい嫌味の性格が出てきてる。And
then again, like I was very fortunate to be working in English here because there's an expression I thought really just fits him to a T. And there's like a kind of old-fashioned term for when someone used to be really popular in the entertainment world and suddenly like they had a bunch of flops and they're not anymore, they're washed up. You say they can't get arrested. Like they're so unpopular, even the police don't want them.
そういうことか。
Right, but he's the crook who's also an entertainer, so like that works perfect for him. So yeah, and then instead of translating like mutsugo as like sextuplets directly, we know there are 6 of them because we could see 6 of them on screen in this particular frame. I thought we can like sort of go back in on that kind of like Francophile thing by using like a common loan word like enfant terrible and probably like, you know, enfants terribles, or whatever you pronounce it as while he's doing.
ね、読みやすくなって、なんかね、入ってきやすくなってるよ、アリスの字幕の方が。ちょっとすごい、今日アリスをベタ褒めするつもりの回じゃなかったんだけど、こう見てみるとやっぱ、すごいやっぱコンテンツこの作品をね、愛して、さらに嫌味を愛してるだけあって、すごい、すごい、嫌味っぽくなってる、字幕が。
Well, I wanted to do him justice. But but yeah, I had a lot of fun thinking of how this one would work. And so it was kind of like this was as easy as breathing, you know. But I also think that this is like one of the most challenging works that you could try to translate into English. And so when I was thinking about what would be the hardest version to subtitle, it'll probably be this next episode, which I'll introduce to you now.
Hi.
Did you watch this one, Asakawa-san?
一末事変ですよ。もう見てますよ。
Could you tell us what happened in this episode?
はい。この普通にバカってお粗末が書いてあるんだけど、一末がね、こう誰もいなかったから、こうカラマツのおしゃれな服をこう着ちゃって、で、こうカラマツになりすまそうとじゃなくて、ただ着ちゃっただけなんだけど、思わずお粗末が起きちゃって、で、人の服着てるなんて思われたくないから、そのままカラマツのふりをするっていう、すごいちょっと、私が一末だったらマジでヒヤヒヤしちゃう、こうディザスターな状況っていう。でもここも、このお粗末とカラマツと一末のやっぱりキャラクターをね見た上で知った上でだからこう15エピソード目にネットフリックスだと16エピソード目に出てくるんだけどもうこう16ぐらいまで見てるとねだいぶそれぞれのキャラクターが分かってるからすごく楽しめるすごい笑っちゃったエピソードの一つですね、っていうシーンですね。
Yeah. So this is a lot of people's like favorite episode of the show, and I think it's one of the funniest things they've ever done, if not the funniest. However, like as you were saying, Hatsukao-san, I don't know if I could recommend this as like the first one that you watch, because it kind of like the reason that it's so funny is because it's showing it's kind of like built on all of the traits that we know about these characters so far, and then seeing them kind of like performed incorrectly. So it's like rewarding you for learning these characters so far. And but by the same token, when you mentioned that this is such like a really stressful scene to watch because you feel so bad for poor Ichimatsu, it actually I do think that this is something that we see a lot in American comedy, like with shows like The Office, for example, or shows like Dairy Girls from Ireland. This kind of like cringe comedy where like you feel bad for everyone involved is very universal.
わかる。もうどんどんスノーボールみたいにどんどん状況が悪くなっていくのがもうわかるっていうね感じです。
Right. So I think like to really like hammer this point home, the most important thing is to make it very stressful and uncomfortable. Because we want the focus to always be on how hard Ichimatsu is trying and how bad he is at it.
そうでもうどんどん話は思わぬ方向に行くっていうところのまず始まりだよね。ここね。
And so this is how the subtitles that I saw were handling this. So the red ones are Osamatsu, the purple ones are Ichimatsu here.
そうなんか最初にカラマツ、あれカラマツいつもカラマツの洋服着てるからね一松が。だからおそ松にそうねムツゴだからなんか様子が変だ。でも変じゃない。で声がおかしいからかなって声ゴホゴホってやるんだけど。なんかいつもと違うって突っ込まれてでカラマツはいつもすごいおしゃれとかナルシストだとかかっこつけてるから思わず今度は英語をね出しちゃうっていうどんどん状況が悪くなるっていうシーンですね。
Right. So that's where the humor is coming from. Like he's trying to work out like, okay, how does Karamatsu do the kinds of things that he does? And the first thing that comes to mind is he's kind of like trying to copy his catchphrases. And when that doesn't work, he starts like speaking in bad English, which is like a thing that Karamatsu keeps doing. It's kind of like a running gag. And I think it's really, really funny. However, the only issue is if we put this like just directly in English, I don't know if this is quite getting that element of the humor across. Because like what starts as a kind of like a dig at Karamatsu can kind of like end up just making Ichimatsu sound stupid if we put it directly in the context of other English, like suddenly he forgets how to use grammar. And that's not quite what we're going for here. And so I feel like this section, it's really funny, but it's funny for a different reason than the original, in that it's kind of like becoming increasingly absurd. It's like a little dada play here going on.
なるほど。
But I was thinking, like, if we were to do an English version of that, what we could make use of is some of the interesting visuals that are happening in this scene. Because what Ichimatsu is doing here is he's actually like speaking to a mirror, and he like picks up a book and speaks to the book. And then he like goes over to the electrical outlets and like points at them like very, it's a funny little scene. And what he's doing with his speech is that he's trying to kind of like inexpertly mimic another character. And so if we can kind of like take those two things as like the key pieces of information that we want to bring in specifically to make this character feel uncomfortable, there are other ways that we can do it. And so this is what I came up with.
Oh. もう早速説明して解説をお願いします。アリス先生。
Okay. Well, the first big change here is in line number 2, where I've got him saying moi, strange, which is because if we look at the visuals here, he's trying to do karamatsu, but he's,
Yami になっちゃってるよ。
Yeah, because he's not very good at it. He's doing like yami instead. And so to kind of like emphasize that is if we have like a set pattern of yami speaking, we could have him mimic that. Show that he's like, he's trying to mimic someone, but he's doing it wrong.
間違えちゃったの。誰から松兄さんになろうとしたのに、嫌になっちゃったっていうね。
Yeah. So I thought that can kind of like build on the visuals there. And then here in this next thing, instead of just having him like speak directly over the top of the English like that, we could kind of like, again, build on the visual information to kind of like suggest another way of, what he's getting himself into and how deep he's, digging himself into the lie. So one thing is like, we could have him speaking of himself kind of unnaturally in like the third person. Isn't that right? Karamatsu's comic, who but Karamatsu? So kind of like, it sounds weird, but doesn't sound like quite as weird if we were to like completely like, break down grammar to try and like make this sound like broken English.
もう本当人格崩壊。そう、キャラクタークラップスみたいななってるよね。ここでね。And
then for that last bit, we could have it like who but Karamatsu would know Karamatsu's favorite electrical outlet, because like that's kind of like matching what he's doing on the screen. It's like, what's something only Karamatsu would know? And it's, of course, completely arbitrary. So this is a way of making it sound like Ichimatsu is thinking, but he is also kind of stupid. And the great thing about this scene is it just elevates and elevates and elevates from there as he kind of keeps digging himself more and more into the lie. And I would encourage you all to see what happens when Karamatsu wakes up and has to interact with this scene, because it's comedy gold no matter what the language.
まさに。このシーンのすぐ後のセリフのやり取りもむちゃくちゃダークになってってそれもすごいね面白いことになっていくっていうね、ぜひもう見ていただきたいですね。確かにこうアリスが今回のアプローチ、コメディって翻訳一番難しいジャンルだと思うんだよね。
Yeah, it's often said that humor is one of the hardest things to, get across the language barrier, because so much of what we find funny is, culturally specific. But I think like with the right approach, we can kind of like find ways that are going to still make people laugh. But that said, yes, it is difficult. But as I mentioned, my reason for wondering about this for so long was that there was a long delayed dubbed version of Osamatsu-san. And now like 5 years after the original came out, it finally came out in English. And what I can say is it's definitely worth the wait. they also went in a completely different direction than I would have expected. So in the勝手にSubtitle that I was sharing with you today, I was kind of like trying to be a little liberal with my approach to think about different ways of communicating what's funny about these characters, but still trying to like be as faithful as I can to the original, what's set in stone about these characters, and try to be like faithful to the idea, if not faithful to the original, letter by letter, words of it. However, the official English dubbed version takes almost completely a different approach. They can kind of like make new jokes where there weren't ones before, and they can kind of like change some of the references to things that people outside of Japan will understand, but people in Japan wouldn't. Like there are like new sides of these characters and new elements to what makes these scenes so funny that are uncovered only in the English because they are being so creative and being so liberal with the translation. And I was so impressed. Can you think of does this ever happen in Japan, Asakawa-san, that they'll just like completely like go off script for the translation?
まさに今アリスの言ったようなのってやっぱトランスクリエーション、トランスカルチャーっていう感じだよね。このコメディというコンテンツは笑わせるっていうことがメイン。このキャラクターのアクションやストーリーと一緒にそこのシーンで笑わせるっていうことがメインになってきたときに、やっぱり日本のコンテンツが海外だけじゃなくて海外のものが日本に来た時にもそのテクニックはすごい使われていて、例えばテッドとかね、クマのねぬいぐるみのテッドももう1970年代に生まれた人がアメリカで育ってきた人が分かるギャグがわって詰め込まれているものが日本に来て吹き替えられた時にそのままじゃ面白くないんだね。笑えないってところでまたそこも町山さんが監修についたりとか、あと昔だとモンティ・パイソンっていうねイギリスのテレビシリーズがあったけど、あれの吹き替えは完全に広川太一郎さんっていう声優さんとか山田康夫さんとか、
Lupin the Third Cast。
ルパンね、人たちがもうその場でアドリブでつけるっていうね、原稿なくてつけるぐらい完全に原文は無視してオリジナルで面白いのを作ってからパイソニアンができたんだよね。だからこのおそ松さんの例もおそ松ニアン
Yes. Osomaniacs, maybe.
オソマニアックが海外にね出てくるかもしれないと思って、これが If It's Work ね、Wow だったらすごい、Yeah,
I hope so. Because this made me so happy to have this appreciation of translation, because it gave me like a whole new way to enjoy one of my favorite shows, and so I was really happy to see that. And I think that like these 2020, 2021, it's been a pretty, not always the most cheerful time to be alive. We've had a lot. It's been a year. It certainly has been interesting times. So I found it really fun to go back and, watch this really like colorful, crazy series and just like forget my troubles for a little while. So if you ever need a little pick-me-up, then I can definitely recommend check out Osomatsu-san. And you can laugh at it no matter what language it is.
ね、そうだよね。これが英語で今回はアリスが作ってくれた、これもアリスのチャレンジなので、他の人もいろんなチャレンジがあっていいし、また違う言語になったらその違う言語、その文化の人たちが笑えるものにおそ松さんがこうデベロップしていくのはすごいおそマニアックが世界中に広がっていく楽しみじゃないかなって思います。いやちょっとね、今日いっぱいコメントいただいてありがとうございます。素晴らしいとかね、ナイスとか、あれだよ、なんかそうね、ザマスはスネ夫のお母さんが使っていましたね。ザンスはイヤミだけだけど、ザマス、そうね、そうでした。はい。ではちょっと今日はすごい新たなジャンルの勝手に字幕をやってきましたけど、皆さんいかがでしたでしょうか。 ですね、JVTA はまだまだこう皆さんの巣ごもり、そしてまあね、アフターコロナ、ウィズコロナの時代を皆さんが元気に楽しく過ごしていけるように、そして学びも得られるようなコンテンツをこれからもお送りしていきたいと思います。ちょっとですね、最後に告知ですね。3月4日ですね、今ずっと巣ごもり応援のレクチャーをセミナーをやってきた中で、また新たにですね、3月4日木曜日19時半からスパイの妻、黒沢清監督のまさにこれも日英字幕翻訳者ですねが登場します。スパイの妻。彼らのおかげでですね、いやでも作品も素晴らしかったんですけれども、ベネツィアで銀獅子賞を取りました素晴らしい作品の翻訳者がね登場します。このセミナーも概要欄下に貼っておきますので見てください。そして3月6日11日、土曜日の11時からは日本人で唯一ゴールデングローブ賞の審査員を務めます中島由紀子さんがなんと LA からですねつないで、皆さんに映画最前線 Now をお伝えします。もっとかっこいい内容ですけれども、今ちょっと朝川のおそ松さんので話してしまっています。中始末ので話してしまっています。でさらにね、アリスが今日一番最初にね言ってくれてた、アリスは私もそうですけど日英コースの先生もしています。じゃあアリスから3月14日のお知らせ。
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Asukawa-san. On March 14th, Sunday from 10 a.m. until 12 a.m., we will be holding an online open school. So this is a free program of seminars to kind of give you an idea about like what it's actually like to work in Japanese to English media translation. We're going to sort of like bust some of the big myths about it and like what translators actually do. And we're going to introduce a bit about like ourselves at JVTA and how our education programs work. And then you'll also be able to join in for a live subtitling session with Haruna Yokoyama, who is one of our instructors here at JVTA and a very accomplished subtitle translator in her own right. So if you have been inspired by today's little session with me to think about, what are some, interesting translation strategies that you could apply to some of your favorite media, I would really encourage you to join us for the online open school from March 14th, Sunday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Japan time. You can sign up from that in the links down below in the comments, and we would love to see you there.
ね、今日こんな風にやるんだ、英語にちょっと自信がないかな、日本語に自信がないかなっていう人もまずちょっとやってみると全然違う感覚になって、自分の字幕が映像に載った体験などもできるので、気軽にぜひ参加してみてください。そちらも概要欄に貼っときます。それではこんな感じですかね。皆さん楽しんでいただけましたでしょうか。
Thanks for watching, everyone.
浅川先生、重始末化しちゃいました。コメント来てます。はい。じゃあ皆さんまた、JVTA プラスセミナーでお会いしましょう。さようなら。お疲れ様。
I would love to see you again. おそ松さんでした。See ya. See you.